wanted to show you first was the buildings. So we'll put the buildings in and I'll show you a technique to add some more detail to buildings. So we'll go to the data sources button there, go to the shape file, add button there. And I created this building samples shape file right here. So I'll just add that in here. So this process, again, same thing that you remember from my previous workshop. In type, you set buildings as the type. In roof height there, this is a height in meters above sea level. And then we're going to use the expression editor to grab that Z value right there. Then in style here, I'm just going to put in a white color, copy and paste that a few times. And then in geolocation, in this case, I exported this out with the LA83 South feet coordinate system. And then in the source tab, I'll choose drape. Then for a lot of stuff, I just choose close and refresh. And this is buildings. And so hopefully all of you remember how to get to this point here. And then the roof pitch, that can be set automatically either by clicking on the buildings and adding the roof pitch, or you can go into the building shapefile layer, double click on that. And right there's a roof slope. So I'm just going to add a number like 40 to see how that looks. And that adds a pitch to it. Now, one thing that you should keep in mind is that the roof pitch actually adds additional height to the building itself. So actually, when you add the roof pitch, the building actually becomes higher than it is in real life. So to mitigate that, what might be a better technique if you have roof pitches is to go into the building layer there, go to that expression editor of the roof height, then just subtract a little bit, like say half a floor or so. So since the Z's in meters, a floor, let's say 10 feet is about 3-ish meters. So you can experiment with that number, maybe like 2 meters or 2.5. I did like 2.5 when I was preparing for this, and that seemed to lowered everything down a little bit. But that way, again, the building height isn't overly exaggerated. Specifically, if you're in a residential area, sometimes it's better to use that method and then go back and remove roof pitches. Say, for instance, I know this building right here in the middle, that does not have one. So I just simply go onto that, and then I just remove the pitch in the settings there. Building detail is something I did not get into last Friday. If you click on the building there, you can click on this thing on manual style when the building properties come up, click on that manual style button. And you can actually, and what I do is I click on it, then there's this more styles button right there, click on that. This brings up a bunch of facades that you can essentially paint over the building facade. The facades come in like several different categories. The reason I don't show this generally is because these facades are generally pretty bad. But some of them are, I would say, generic enough where you can use them and it adds a little bit of detail to the buildings, and it's not that distracting. There's a little button here that allows you to make the icons a little bit bigger so that you can see them better. And then pick one of the styles that you, let's say I pick this one here, then click OK. You see it basically adds windows, it adds stuff to it. And what we'll do is when we import this into, say, Rhino later, we'll just remove and hide all the material. So it's more of like a white matte material with a little bit of indentation. What you can do is you can go to, in the Manage tab, in the Display dropdown, there is this thing called Style Rules. If you click on that, you can basically create a expression that applies building facades randomly at different percentages to any building feature in this model here. So here's how you do that. Basically, after you open Style Rules, you go to the tab on the side that says Buildings. It should be the second from the top of the list. You choose this plus icon here to add a style rule. Give it a name, call this one Building Style. Then you double click that to edit it. And then in the styles little table down here, there's a little thing called Add. You choose that. And what you can do is you can add a bunch of styles into this list here. And then there's a probability number there. This doesn't really mean anything. As long as these numbers are the same number, it just makes it so that it's all going to be like an even probability. But if you want one to have a greater probability, you can increase that as in proportion to the others. Click OK. And then with that selected, you can choose this Run Rules at the bottom, and they'll randomly apply a style to the buildings. So this style here, I chose a few building facades. This one called Achilles, this one called Balthasar, this one called Rebecca. They represent fairly generic building style. If right now, if I zoom into these, you see there's actually 3D articulation in the massing. If you play with that tool, you may not see 3D articulation if a certain setting isn't enabled. So I'm gonna go to Utilities up here, go to Application Options in the Utilities. And then in model generation here, the third option from the bottom of the left side window, there's this building facade detail option there. If that's set to low, it might be set to low by default. It won't show the detail. I think I just need to refresh this. If, for instance, you try this method here and the buildings are flat looking, go in here, go to application options, go to model generation, then just make the building facade detail high. So the next thing that I'm going to show you guys is going to be trees. If you have a point data set of trees, tree location point data set you see here, you can bring those into Infraworks and then basically put a tree model at the location of each of those points. Data sources, go into SHP, and then find the location of that point data set here. Mine's called tree location points. So do that. You double click on that feature. In the type, you set that to be a tree. In style here, you basically click on the little pencil button there and you pick a tree model. In geolocation, just make sure that it has a coordinate system. In source, choose set elevation. Normally, I would say choose drape. And what that will do is just make sure that the tree model touches the actual surface. What I did is I added the ground elevation to each of those points in the attribute table in GIS. So for this particular data set, you can choose set elevation. And then in the expression editor, just set that to be the Z value like that. And then we'll do close and refresh, just see what we get. So choose close and refresh. So that's what basically the whole point is, that basically you get all the tree models located in the correct location of the data set itself. Right now, it's being visualized as abstract trees. So to turn them into realistic trees, you basically open the visualization settings window here, and then check this realistic trees option. One thing that I recommend doing is you see how the trees tend to look like copy pasty. You know, if you actually get down to actually they're floating, all right. The Z elevation thing I said didn't work, so I'll just do this, set to drape, close and refresh. Yeah, that worked better. All right, ignore what I said about everything with regards to this, just choose drape. And then one thing that you can do, and just to avoid this copy pasty look that you see here, is to go to the table tab here and then give everything a rotation that is, you can almost say, a random rotation. And so what I do is I basically go into the rotate Z line right here, choose the expression editor. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a number that's part of the attribute table, let's say the feature ID, and I'm just going to multiply that by 10. And what's going to do is going to take the ID number of every single tree and just going to give it a rotation of 10 degrees based on the ID number. And so every tree now will have its own unique rotation. And then you can just choose that again, close and refresh. And also, before I choose that again, you can also scale the tree models in here if you want them to be larger or smaller. So you can do like 1.5 in the scales of X, Y, and Z. And if you choose that, this is how you quickly mass out trees using that point data set. Okay, I'm going to get back to trees in a moment, but I just want to show you that real quick just to show you how you can mass out trees using the point data set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to add a little background to this base here. So right now we've been working with a neutral surface here with no texture. Maybe you want to just have a little bit of reference material here just so you can see what it actually looks like in that area. You should be able to add a aerial base in Infraworks using what's called the Bing Maps imagery. Bing Maps is like the Microsoft version of Google Maps. And the way you do that is you choose this thing called Add Database Data Source. It's the little cylinder looking button next to that. And then in this connection type here, you choose this Bing Maps option right there. And then in here, there are several resolutions to the quality of the Bing Maps base that you can use. I recommend going to the highest resolution, which is the one at the very bottom of this list, then choosing OK, then OK again. And then you just, once that comes in here, just right click on that, then refresh that. And what it's going to do, it's going to take maybe 30 seconds, is it's going to download that imagery and then it's going to drape it over this. So this is a nice way for you to get a texture of the ground plan. and it'll have a better sense of what it looks like. And then basically, once you're ready to export this out, just make sure that in the surface layers, you just turn that imagery off, and then you export this out as a simple blank canvas. You can actually also export this with imagery as well. It'll just come in with that texture. So the reason I bring up this is now there are some areas of the model in the park here where there is additional canopy, like you can see here, that was not part of that original tree point data set. And so this is an easy way that you can reference that background and get a sense of where you need additional trees. So I'm going to show you the stand of trees technique, but basically go to create, environment, stand of trees, choose that, and then choose a tree model from this list here. You have to scroll down to near the bottom here and then pick a model. And then basically what you can do is you can click roughly where the trees are in this and just basically mass out that area. So I'm going to do that real quickly for that. And a few of you, I've already shown this to you already, so I don't need to explain it again, but you can use this stand of trees technique here to creatively, say, for instance, add areas of mass planting or mass thicket. And then the last thing that I will show you in Infraworks before we export this into Rhino is I'm going to show you how to add some roads to this, but not roads as you think. It's not adding the roads using the road tools here. If in GIS you have things like this, data sets that represent the pavement as a solid shapefile, you can add this into Infraworks as a overlay. So here's what I recommend doing. Clip the roads to the square. So you search for clip, first one, clip. In the analysis tools, extracts input features that overlay the clip features, choose that. And then in input features, you choose the edge of pavement. In the clip features, you choose your box. And then output data set, you save it somewhere as a shapefile. So I'll save it here and I'll call this one edge of pavement clip to box. Then choose run, clipped. So with that, you go to Infraworks and then go to the add shapefile, edge of pavement, clip to box. We just made this. So choose that shapefile, comes in, double click on that to configure that. We're going to set the type to be this one, coverage areas. Choose coverage areas. In geolocation, just make sure that it actually has a coordinate system, which it does. I'm going to go back to the comment tab, and then in style here, choose that little pencil, and then go to the color tab at the bottom, then just give it like a grayish color. Then click OK, and click close and refresh. If I hover my mouse over it, it added a shapefile to this model of the edge of the road. And when we export this out into Rhino, this comes as its own individual mesh. So you can actually take this and give it its own color. You can take the medians in between that, give its own color. So this is just a very handy thing to have. Though one thing you see right here is that this pavement actually includes the highway here. Maybe what I want is I just want this to represent the actual roads that are not highways, like more residential, more slower traffic. And the highway is not something that we have this overlay showing. And also you can see right here, certain areas when you have this LiDAR, you have these continuous bridges that kind of go through the model, and then the road kind of like runs over that. That looks weird sometimes. So all that means is that in GIS, you just need to edit this file so that it's a bit more refined. Let me choose the edit tool here, choose select to grab this shapefile here, then choose the split tool here. And I'm just going to remove the highway layer or highway section of this. So I'll just click, 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 double click like that. And then you can basically cut one side, then do the other side. So just do that again. Like so. And then I'm just going to take that highway and delete it. Now it's gone. So then when we add this into the model, it won't have that weird condition. And then again, there was a portion of this, like right here, where the road went over this particular rail. Here, click on the shapefile and edit it. We'll just split it around that bridge feature, then delete those elements. And then once you're happy with that, just choose save, then save all edits, choose yes. And then in Infraworks, just right click on that and refresh it because it's already added. It just needs to update the link, and now all those weirdness of that going over that road is fixed. So that's coverage areas. So I'm going to now take this model here and I'm going to export this to Rhino. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to import all that stuff that I exported from Infraworks, and I'm going to show you my personal workflow that I use whenever I'm trying to make diagrams. Import ground, we'll import that first. And then the whole purpose of showing you the coverage area is that now is its own element that you can modify. To remove any texture or image in the background, you just basically go into your texture material settings here, and you have all these materials that you have here. You just basically need to delete these materials or move the layers to a new layer and then set the material to something different. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to import buildings, type in import buildings. That comes in, I'll move that to its own layer. So while that's selected, change object layer, buildings, call it buildings. So now that's on its own layer, turn it on and off. I'm going to take the actual road surface, this here, put that it's on its own layer. So that's on its own layer now, call this road. And then everything else is basically on the last layer here. So I'll select these objects, choose, change, and then that's on the ground surface, we'll call this on terrain. And just for today's tutorial, I'm going to remove the texture. So I'm just going to select everything and make sure that the material is assigned by the layer. And that is an easy way just to get rid of all the textures. You can maybe give the roads like a slightly darker color just to give it a little bit of contrast. So import trees. Okay. So I'll move that to its own layer. So I'll right click on this, change layer, and now that's there. So what I like to do whenever I set up this model is I like to set up a little frame around the whole thing. So the way I create a frame around the whole thing, so I'm just going to do this. I'm going to select this surface, this mesh. Let me turn off the buildings and everything else is fine. I'm going to select all this stuff here. I'm going to copy that into a new layer so that we have a copy. Then I'm going to take all that stuff and I'm going to join it so that we have one mesh. I'm going to simplify it a little bit. So I'm going to choose reduce mesh, reduce by 75%. You can reduce by a lot and it actually does not impact the detail that much, honestly. So I'm going to just reduce by 75%. And this is just optimization again. So it's reducing. So again, if you're dealing with an issue where your Rhino is crashing, reducing meshes might be one thing you can do as well. What I'm going to do is with this now optimized, I'm going to call this one just temp. I'm going to create a new layer. I'll call this one frame. So then make my current layer. I'm going to choose this and I'm going to create use a tool called duplicate border. So dupe border, choose that. And then you create a border of the whole thing. And it should just automatically save to the frame because that's the current layer. So now you have a border of this. And then what I do is I take that curve there, I make a copy of it. So I type in copy and then type in I. What that does is it copies it in place so that it just like copies and has two versions of that. So now there's two curves, one on top of another. So I'm just take one of those curves. I'm going to use the set point command, then uncheck X and Y so that only Z is selected. Then that basically makes it so you create a square that you can use to build out a frame. So I'm going to take that square and move it down a little bit. Maybe choose a number like -100 or something like that to create that frame. And then basically it's taking these two curves and creating a frame for the surface. But before you do that, I always like to do this. If you turn on the points for this, you see there's just like so many points with this. It just needs to be simplified. So take your curves and just type in simplify curve. And it's not going to remove all the points. It's going to keep a lot, but it's going to remove enough so that's not overly detailed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bottom curve, I'm going to type in extrude so that you just extrude out a little frame and just kind of make it so that it intersects with that top curve like that. Then type in split, then split this frame by that curve, and then delete that top element there. Then take this frame and type in cap, then it caps the bottom of it. Then you can turn on your terrain again. And then that's how I create my own little frame for this. And then what we can do is now all this stuff set in place. Now you can set your view. So we'll go to perspective, set view, isometric. Let's choose southwest view like this. Then once you have your view, just save a view. So I'll go to the named views panel in the properties panel, then choose save as, and just call it isometric like so. So now you have that saved. As always, whenever you're doing any of this work, just hit the save button in Rhino a couple of times, just so you don't lose your work forever. So I'll call this one demo model. Okay. And then once you have, I just saved the model. Now we go into Enscape. So what I like to do is in Infraworks, this is a technique that I've shown some of you, is the trees. You can see here, the texture of the trees just looks really weird. the best technique to do is to take everything and give it one material. So the way you do that is you go to this visual settings button there. Then in the first tab in mode, just choose white, and then it just gives everything a white material. Polystyrol is a very similar material. It's a little bit softer, so you can choose whichever one you like, white or polystyrol. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to set this to be, maybe dock this to the side, dock that to the side, and I'm going to set the camera to be synced between the two. So I'm going to, in Rhino, choose this sync camera option there, and then now the two models are synced so that when I move it in Rhino, it syncs it in Enscape. And then I'm going to set the sun angle to be something that is interesting or cool, so that when we render it out, it has a little bit of depth to it. So just pick something that highlights the architecture well, highlights the trees well, shows a little bit of that topography a bit. Something like that kind of works. The keyboard shortcuts, if you don't know in Enscape, you can find them by clicking on the question mark in the help panel of Enscape right there. If you click on that, you get all your keyboard shortcuts here. And so time of day, that's just choosing the U and I keys on your keyboard. And so I choose those. That's how I am able to basically move around the time. So all your keyboard shortcuts are here. Then once you're happy with the general look and feel, go into visual settings here, go to output here, set the resolution to custom, choose a nice high resolution. So something like 7200 by 4800 pixels is pretty high. As long as the resolution is sharp enough that when you print it, not pixelated, that's good. Then check this option here to get some helpful layers that you can use to Photoshop it. And then check this as well, apply alpha channel. And then PNG is the best format, and then that's good. And then just choose screenshot. One thing I do is I click on this safe frame option just to make sure that when I have it rendered, it's not cropping anything, and also that you get the most amount of resolution for the image that you're exporting. So then that's set, and just choose screenshot. And then choose a location, Exxon demo. Okay, it's done. So we don't need Enscape anymore. Just close out of Enscape. What we're going to do now is we're going to set up the line work base for this. What I like to do is I like to create layout views. And so what I do is on the bottom of Rhino, there's this little plus button right there to create a layout view. So click on that and choose new layout. And I'm going to set it to be a 36 by 24 inch board. So it's already set right there. Then click OK. Then this frame here that represents the viewport here, you just make sure that that is set to the default layer. And then I type in the points on to get the handles for this and just make sure that it's filling out the entire page of it. Then you double click in there to set your view, the view settings. So set view to be that isometric view. And then what I'll do is just kind of make it fit. And then for the assignment and in the templates that I gave you, if you set the scale in here to be 1/120, that basically is the scale that matches the scale on the board. And then basically once that's set up, just make sure you save that isometric view again so that we don't lose that location. And then what I do is I turn off certain layers, I leave on certain layers. So here's my workflow. What I like to do is like to go into the model view here, get some contours first. So what I'll do is we'll click on the temp layer. We'll choose type in contour or create a new layer called contour. Then we're going to contour this. So I type in contour. In the base point, that's going to be 0. The direction perpendicular, that's just a vertical line up. So what I do is I go to a front view, then hold shift, and then just basically lock at that to a vertical axis. Then I just click. And then the distance between contours would be 1 for 1 foot. Then hit enter. And then I group those contours. So I hit Control G while the contours are just selected. So I hit Control G on my keyboard. And now you have contours at 1 foot intervals. Then I'll do it again. Contour 5 foot. Double click on that. Click on the mesh. Contour that. Base point is 0. Direction perpendicular is going to be vertical again. And now I'm going to choose 5. Group that. Control G. So now you have minor contours and major contours really quickly. So. And then with that set up, now you have contours. And then what I do is I temporarily turn those off. I go to the road layer right here. I take this and I choose duplicate border. Now I have roads. So I set that to its own layer, road outline, change that. So I have roads. And then the next one is buildings. So I turn on the building layer. I select those buildings, select objects, go to my isometric view just so we get the right angle, choose make 2D. So I only make 2D the building. So I type in make 2D. Then all these settings are good. We'll see what happens. So I click OK. So I go to the top view. You can now see this is your Make 2D layer. I group that, Control G while it's still selected. So my technique is I take this layer here, I group it, I cut it. So Control X on my keyboard to cut it to my clipboard. Then I go to the layout view here and I paste it into the layout view on top of the viewport. So it just comes in at the real scale. Then I just manually scale it down like that. I hold Shift on my keyboard and I use the gumball scaling tool just to quickly scale things down. And then when you get it sort of at the right scale, then you basically scale it with more precision. So I type an M on my keyboard to move it, choose a corner of one of the items here, then snap it to the corner of the layout view like that, type in scale, then choose that corner again, then choose another corner of another object like that one, move it out like that, and then turn off the building layer, the actual 3D building layer. And then that's how I get my buildings into the layout view. Because the other geometry, they're just lines. And as long as the angle is correct, everything will line up. And then the last one's the frame. So the frame needs to be added as well. So I go to isometric, turn the frame, select the frame, select objects, make 2D. So now that's your frame right there. You might need to take this frame and ungroup it because some things are grouped. The frame has the inside of the frame. We can just delete that. And then I'm just going to choose the bottom curves, join them together using the join tool, then choose the top curves, join those, hit join to join them together. So now you have a top curve, the bottom curve, and you have the side curves. Take that whole thing, group that, and cut that in the layout view. Paste that again, paste that, do that, scale, and that's it. And then you can turn off the frame. What I will also do is I'll make the colors of the layers distinguishable so that we can use the color select tool in Illustrator to clean things up. So now with that all set, okay, I'm going to export this out. What I do is I right click on the layout tab, choose print, and then I print to a PDF because PDFs are vectorized and we just use the vectorized PDF to isolate the layers. I'll show you how to do that in Illustrator. Then click print, demo, save. Let's go to Illustrator, open, demo, I think that's it. So that's the line work layer. Here's my workflow in Illustrator. Once you have your line work in here, first thing I do is I go to select, object, clipping masks. Choose that. You see some things have been selected. I just hit delete on my keyboard and then the clipping masks are gone. Expand the layers in the layer panel. I choose the little circle to select everything at once. Then I ungroup everything because things are in groups. So the ungroup command shortcut is Control-Shift-G on Windows keyboards. And then you make several layers in Illustrator and then just choose elements of the model. Let's start with the road here, choose that. Then choose select same stroke color. And then that selects everything that's of that color. So that's the roads. What I do is I first start with the building layer. So I go to the building layer here. I'm going to make everything a black color like so. What I like to do is I like to use the paint bucket tool. And so here's my technique. As I select all these objects in the building layer, I'm going to take the building layer, these two here. I'm just make a copy of them by just dragging them into the plus icon. That's a quick way to make a copy. And then these elements here, I'm just going to collapse into a single layer. So now we have one layer of all the buildings in one layer. I'm going to create a rectangle around everything like that. Then I'm going to select this whole thing with that rectangle and choose that paint bucket. So paint bucket is right here in the left side here. You can get to it by also just choosing K. And I'm going to use that paint bucket tool to make this whole thing a paint bucket. So I click in there, make live paint group. Now you can actually fill in colors, but I'm only going to fill in one color. And that's going to be the outside of the building. So I'm just going to choose a color like red, K, to get the paint bucket. And I'm just going to do that. And then I'm going to select that, hide all the lines so that there's no lines. So right now the strokes have a black line to it. I'm just going to choose that in the stroke and the bottom left of the side here, choose this little none. So now all the strokes are gone. So there's no more strokes. Then choose that and then choose expand at the top here. And what you've done is you've created silhouettes of the buildings. Then you choose that layer there, right click on the ungroup button and then choose right click on that and choose release compound path, then delete that square. Then you have basically created like silhouettes of your buildings. So that I just give it a simple outline with a white base, and then I move that to the base of the original building layers and turn those on. So now you can basically have this effect where you have an outline around the buildings with like the line work in it. But then like contours, I'll just click on contour major, make that 0.5, make it like a black stroke. Take contour minor, make that like 0.25, make it like a mid-gray stroke. I'll also take the contours and maybe give it a little bit of transparency. Then the axon layer, this here, you just give that a nice thick 3-point boundary. Same with the axon base. Then roads, you turn that on, choose that, give that a thickness as well, black 0.75. So now you've basically created your base, and then lock all your layers, go to Photoshop. So we're going to open, go to that layer there, open the Axon PNG that we just created. So that was the rendering we created. I'm going to use this thing called image, trim, transparent pixels, adjustment layer, hue saturation, curves, then save as, then just give it a new name, call it base, save as a PNG, then go back to Illustrator, open that, take that, copy it into this layer here, and then just with that selected, you can give it a multiply, then just get it to line up with that. And then that's like the start of your base model. Okay. Okay. Oh, she's not happy. She's not happy. Okay, I'll put you down. Put you down. Miva's not happy. I picked her up when she didn't want me to pick her up. All right. Say goodbye to everyone. Miva's like, meow, 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 meow.